Welcome to Punchline Talks Politics, the budget, sponsored by Infostar IT Solution. I'm Mark Owen, and today my special guest is Richard Graham. He's the ex-MP for Gloucester and for the Tory party. Richard, thanks for joining us. I know you're there in London today. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Punchline Talks. So, what did you think of the budget? What's your number one take on it?
My number one take on this budget, I think, Mark, is that it was always going to be a very difficult balancing act. We knew that there were going to be a lot of taxes coming down the line, I think £40 billion worth of them. And I say it was always going to be difficult because we were promised that there would be no new taxes. So I think, for many people in the country, this was always going to be a difficult day when the truth of what the new government was going to do was presented. So there we are. We've got taxes now on national insurance, capital gains tax, inheritance tax, energy, business rates, and stamp duty. I think, Rishi's point was that your business, your home, and your savings are now all being taxed more. Now, the real question, the substance behind all of this is it going to deliver the growth that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister hope? And I would say on the evidence of what we've seen today so far, and there's always a lot of devil in the detail and looking at the Red Book and trying to work out what the real impact is going to be. I wouldn't say that this is going to stimulate investment or encourage growth. I think the business sectors in particular will be feeling quite hard hit. I mean, my back of the fag pack calculation is that for an average worker on 37 hours a week on the minimum wage, that will cost their employer an extra roughly 44 quid a week in terms of the salary and national insurance, 2,200 quid a year. Now, some of that is good news for the worker, but it's not necessarily good news if employers are either going to have to lay off people or if they're not going to be able to take on new people coming into the workplace from school, college, or university. So I think that's the challenge on the employment side. And for small businesses in particular, like so many that you and I know in Gloucester, particularly those in the hospitality trade, they were getting a 75% discount on business rates. That's now been reduced to 40%. So, I think that's going to mean inevitably they're going to be paying more tax on their business rates. That's going to make life tougher. So for employers, this is a very difficult budget. For workers, which I think was the aim of this government's first budget, there is some good news in there. But as I say, it's only good news if it's going to be sustainable and their job will still be there.
You're talking about £44 or 2,200. You've got to find that business, that money from somewhere. And this was the debate I had with Alex McIntyre just over, 45 minutes ago, an hour ago, straight after the budget, that these businesses can't afford that. Now, his argument was that the people who've got these pay rises will be able to afford to spend more in shops and, spread it through the economy. But of course, you've got to find that money first.
Yeah. Well, it is quite true that typically consumer spending amongst the lowest paid is very high. They haven't got the ability to save a great deal because they're not getting paid enough to be able to save. And you might argue that the savings culture needs to be boosted a bit. So there is an element of some of it coming back in, say, VAT and so on. But the main beneficiaries of extra spending by people getting paid a bit more will be the supermarkets and the sort of pizza takeaways, some of that sort of consumer business, but it's not really going to help the small employers in the hospitality sector more widely. I think, that will be a bit of a wake-up call if the assumption is that a bit more salary means that all these businesses will be okay.
I mean, not being funny, especially for the hospitality trade, there's only so much that you're going to be willing to pay for a pizza eating out. There's only so much you're willing to pay for a steak and chips, because it is the product that it is. And it comes to a point where actually it's not worth it. It's not worth paying £32 for a steak, no matter how much garnish you put next to it and how many different sauces you've got on it.
Yeah. Let's try and focus also on some positives in there, Mark. I mean, obviously, there's more money for the NHS, there's some more money for education. Public services are getting more spending. This government would call it investment. The important thing is really all about the productivity gains that come with it, and whether the extra money being given to the NHS and so on will result in that improvement in service that we've all wanted to see for quite some time since the pandemic. So that, I think, it was the right thing to do. Any government would have had to have done it. And the question is, will public services improve? So I think, we'll have to wait and see on that. But certainly more money going that way will be popular with public services and people working in the government sector.
Now, you talked about productivity. I'd just very like to touch. You're in London. I was in London just the other week as well. I had to take the train back on a Sunday. All the services were cancelled. There wasn't enough train drivers on a Sunday.
Well, there is a real problem, in my view, with the union agreements with rail operators, which is they don't have to work on a Sunday. It's up to them whether they turn up or not. Now, you couldn't run an airline on that basis. You wouldn't run a bus company on that basis. But for some reason, ASLEV and other unions have been able to avoid having Sunday treated like a normal work day, as it would be in any other sector where you're providing a service. So it is very odd. It's an anomaly that I've been ranting about for quite a long time. I think some operators have got better agreements with their unions and their drivers than others. But certainly that is an issue in terms of public services, although, of course, the train operators are still at least nominally private for the time being, that it would make a great help if it could be resolved.
Do you think the extra cash is really going to help the NHS? Do you think they'll be able to turn it around and make it more, increase the productivity of it? Because let's be honest, we know the NHS sieves money. It's like a big money pit at the end of the day.
So there are specific things, some of the money that was leaked in an announcement yesterday is for very specific things. And we know that, for example, where the previous government gave money for diagnostic centres, and we've got that new one in Gloucester just beside the old prison, that it's been actually a considerable success. It stops people going into the hospital. They're treated outside. It's a very friendly, user-friendly place. So there are some specific ring-fenced announcements in there, which I think the NHS will be able to benefit from. But that bigger question of the large numbers of people, I mean, the Hospitals Trust will correct me if I get this wrong, but from memory, only a few months ago, it was 10% of their workforce was off on long or short-term sick. And that's a very high percentage of the workforce. And we basically need everybody to be working at their most productive in order to be able to help the population of Gloucestershire who need those services. I don't personally think calling the NHS broke helps. I don't think the NHS is broken, but I do think it does need a lot of TLC and encouragement, motivation to make it working at its best.
I've got to ask you about Rishi Sunak. You've always been a big fan. And, today he gave a very, very passionate speech at the end, and one of the best speeches I've seen him make. And do you feel he could have done that a little bit more while he was, leader and the MP himself, Prime Minister? He could have. I think we could have seen a lot more of Rishi. That's what the real passionate man there.
So I've always said that history will treat Rishi far more kindly than the catastrophic defeat of the Conservatives in the general election would indicate. And the reason for that is partly because I think that he is a genuinely, incredibly hardworking, thoughtful, caring individual in an age where politicians' reputation is relatively low. His should be incredibly high for that. And, when Craig McKinley, the guy who lost his arms and legs from sepsis, told us that actually the Prime Minister the then Prime Minister Rishi had visited him 4 times in hospital without making any noise or fuss or announcement about it at all. I think it's just an indication of where his values are. So on the substance, he's certainly the brightest economist we've had as Prime Minister probably for a very, very long time. He read the markets absolutely right when he was battling it out with Liz for the leadership. He anticipated the high inflation. He knew what would happen if you did what she did. And he's been absolutely right in highlighting the dangers of just leveling on more taxes on businesses from whom we're expecting the investment, the growth, and the jobs of the future. So this was almost his last day as prime minister, as leader of the opposition. Sorry, and it was an opportunity for a big speech, and I think he delivered it. But I think he also put down some key markers for this government about how over this parliament, the next 4 years, they again have to do things differently, and really just whacking up public servants' salaries, giving them the deals that we saw with the junior doctors and all the rest of it, the train drivers. That is not a solution for the sort of economy that we need, where public sector needs to be lean and efficient and highly respected. And we need to really go for growth through business, which was what Rishi and Jeremy Hunt were doing, and I think successfully.
Richard, unfortunately, that's all we got time for. Thanks ever so much for joining us there in London, for joining Punchline Talks, the budget special. I'd just like to thank our fantastic sponsors, Infostar IT Solutions, and everybody who's been watching. If you like the show, please like, share, and subscribe. And we'll be back again very soon. Thank you. Bye.